This Assassin's Creed game failed in 2014, a game notorious for its many bugs, glitches and overall bad press, from French government being involved and the developers calling women irrelevant. However, this game in 2024 is nothing but a beautiful masterpiece plagued by an ambitious team that flew too close to the sun. This is Assassin's Creed Unity. If you were to bring up Unity to anyone who has ever interacted with the Assassin's Creed franchise, they would tell you that this is probably one of the worst games in the series, due to the many issues that plague this game, like bugs, glitches, lack of story and uninteresting main character. But then if you look at what's right in front of you, this beautifully designed game with incredible visuals and smooth gameplay from the combat to the parkour, it makes you wonder, is there actually any truth in it? Or is it just blind hate? Even the reviews on this game are very positive overall, so what on earth makes this game so disliked by the wider audience? To understand this better, we need to dive into the development of AC Unity and go back to their previous titles, because they give us a really good idea on why a game that at face value looks beautiful is considered to be extremely poor. It might be hard to believe now, as Assassin's Creed has faded into a more "oh cool, a new Assassin's Creed game has released" type of franchise, but in the late 2000s and early 2010s, Assassin's Creed games were highly anticipated by most gamers who were interested in the action-adventure genre and seen as must-have games for their incredible open worlds, stories and characters. There have been many runs within the gaming industry, like Call of Duty 4 up until Black Ops 2 and Halo 1 to Reach, and well, Assassin's Creed had one as well. Because when I tell you they had a run, boy, they had a run. Every game was bigger and better than the previous one. Maybe not always on the aspect certain fans wanted, but it always kept the best parts of the previous games and expanded on it with better gameplay mechanics, more customization options, different movement possibilities and better written stories. Take Black Flag for example. To me, one of the worst entries within the entire franchise, but considered to be one of the better Assassin's Creed games by a large part of the fanbase, and a game that did very well sales wise. The shift from a city structure to an island structure, which you traverse through by using your own ship, was a fresh take on the franchise, but still kept the Assassin's Creed identity at its core. However, at the same time, this might have also been the last Assassin's Creed game that truly felt like one, because I feel like a lot of people don't want to admit that this game might have been the start for the downfall of the entire franchise. In 2010, Ubisoft established what they call the Onion structure, which is just a weird name for a three-pillar structure for the franchise. They concluded that games would always need to consist of three main design pillars. 2012, which was the Desmond/present day story, the Animus, the story of the machine that lets you go back into the past, which is more of a visual representation that sets the theme of the game, more so than telling an actual story about the machine itself. Think about the heads-up display, the HUD, menus and databases that you can access during your time playing to learn more about the history of certain places and characters. And of course, the past story, which is a story of the ancestor of the person in the Animus and the main stories of the games. During Black Flag's present day story, the Desmond story was concluded and they wanted to put the player more central to the current day story. They did so by making it a first person experience and the main protagonist wouldn't speak. Now, I'm not going to sit here and claim that the Desmond storyline was some sort of cinematic masterpiece, but at least it was a storyline. Till doing research for this video, I didn't even know I was supposed to be the person in the animus and thought it was just some random dude that was selected because he just so happened to have the right genes. This trend continued with Assassin's Creed Unity, but they decided to knock down another one of the major design pillars, the past story. Of course, there is one. I mean, that is the whole concept of the game, yet the story itself is, well, nothing to write home about. Assassin's Creed used to fill you with curiosity. You wanted to know more about the mysterious ancestor you were controlling, their story, the NPC stories, and the world held secrets in its many tombs and hidden areas. In Unity, the main protagonist Arno is very uninteresting, and you want to explore the world to do side missions because you would otherwise get stuck in the main storyline because, well, it's scaled up, and if you just focus on the main storyline, you wouldn't be strong enough. The whole point of side missions in these types of games is to interact with them in between main story missions because you're interested. I mean, the majority of games within the genre probably have more interesting side missions than main storyline missions, but Unity doesn't. They feel more like chores than interesting escapades you would get lost in before realizing you were supposed to go to the other side of Paris about 4 hours ago to complete the main storyline. Now, I wish this was just my opinion, but actually, the lead designer of this game said it himself.
We had a game that was wonderful in terms of art, but that was not renewing enough the experience.
They created the perfect storm, flew too close to the sun, got lost in the sauce. Okay, well, we didn't say the last thing, but you get the point. They focused too much on creating their new engine, which allowed them to improve the free running, the combat, and create a beautiful looking world with 1-to-1 scale buildings. Like seriously, the Notre Dame in this game is so realistic that they used a model of it to rebuild the actual Notre Dame when it burned down back in 2019. But unfortunately, during the development of this game, they made the same mistakes as they did before. The same mistakes they made in 2007, but this time they couldn't fix it and actually made it worse for themselves. The mistakes I was speaking about? Well, Assassin's Creed 1. It's seen as a revolutionary game, the start of a multi-billion-dollar Assassin's Creed genre, but in reality, it was just a tech demo with an interesting story. This is not to downplay the game, because what it is, especially for its time, was revolutionary. But it wasn't until Assassin's Creed 2 that the franchise really took flight. Like, literally. The reason for this? Well, they focused too much on creating the actual engine and gameplay mechanics that they forgot to develop enough interesting things to do for the players within the original Assassin's Creed game. The main activities, for example, like free running and fighting, weren't even properly incorporated into the main story missions. Now, this is fine with your first title, but Unity wasn't their first title, but still made the same mistakes. But that wasn't everything. Now, if you forgot to focus on creating a compelling story with interesting characters, at least make sure that the aspects you did spend so much time on actually function properly. Now, don't get me wrong, there's some perspective to be had here. This was the first Assassin's Creed title on a new console with a completely new engine and revamped fundamentals of the game. The combat was changed from a stand here and wait for enemies to attack and press square so you can one-hit KO them to a more fluent fighting system. And the buildings, having different properties as they were now one-to-one photorealistic designs of actual buildings, made it so that the entire free running side of the engine also had to be revamped. This made the free running overall a lot more smooth, even though, unfortunately, it still has the same Assassin's Creed clunkiness where your character decides to climb on things that, well, you don't want to climb on. The fact that these two aspects functioned pretty much flawlessly on launch, the combat and free running, was actually quite impressive. However, the glitches you just saw plagued the entire game. Characters not loading in, popping of large groups of NPCs, and texture glitches pestered this game on release. But even at the time, it started to become a standard for AAA games to release in more and more broken states for it to then be patched out later. Fortunately, Assassin's Creed Unity is no exception to that. If you buy the game now, it functions exactly how you expect it to and barely experiences any glitches at all, plus it looks absolutely beautiful and especially so on PC. So a mediocre story, one-dimensional main character and some bugs, that's it? that makes this one of the most disliked Assassin's Creed games of all time? Well, in essence, yes. There isn't much wrong with the game if you buy it now, but Ubisoft, as Ubisoft does, didn't help themselves much with some other features and statements. Before we get into Ubisoft making it to French national television, calling female characters irrelevant, and not wanting to give the main character a French accent because it would be offensive, let's talk about the Unity companion app for your phone that existed for a whole month. The companion app was an app that allowed you to complete little missions to unlock some in-game gear and money that would help your character's progression within the main game. It functioned as an extension to the full game from the palm of your hand. Was it tedious? Sure, but a cool idea in essence. Now imagine this, you're on your commute back from school or work, and you could open up the map, check what missions you would want to interact with once you got home, or read up on some lore about certain characters and interact with the app specific missions and get rewarded for doing so. However, it took quite long and it was missing another, well, I guess fundamental feature. It wouldn't save and track your progress properly. So, well, it was useless and pulled offline within a month of release. Yeah, that didn't help with the already crumbling PR surrounding the game. Because boy, I want to know who at Ubisoft was cooking at this point, because Gordon Ramsay would not be happy with them.
You fucking donkey!
It was PR disaster after PR disaster. Now, let's not pretend like the French aren't sometimes just a little bit too proud of being French. But the game did portray Louis XIV, the then King of France, as a sympathetic guy, and the French people, the revolutionary, as bloodthirsty mobs of people. Now, not to bore you with a history lesson, but that's not really how it went. Louis wasn't executed because he was a nice guy. He did oppress the working class Frenchmen at the time, and the people were sick of it. He was the villain, and in the game, he isn't really portrayed as that. Now, some French boomer politician being angry was just another drop in the PR disaster bucket that Unity was, because besides historical inaccuracy in a game that literally claims to work with historians, they also found female characters were not important enough to develop either. Please understand that I'm not one of those people that want a female character just to have one in the game. I feel like that is just as disrespectful, if not more disrespectful, as not having one. If you want to make a story about a French assassin called Arnaud and you want him to be male, that's okay. But when you have a multiplayer option that is less canon with the story, it would be nice to have a female character there, which wouldn't even be new for the series, as we have seen them in previous titles. However, there weren't any. Well, there must be a good reason for it, right? Well, the extra animations and assets for a female character was too much work, according to Ubisoft creative director Alex Amaccio. Sure, but 45% of all gamers are actually women, and for a game that prides themselves for developing the games with a multicultural and diverse group of people with different beliefs, etc., which you see at the start of every game, openly admitting this is kind of an L. Oh, and not to mention, they thought that giving Arnaud and other main characters a French accent was too offensive. So you're telling me you're openly excluding women is fine and calling it irrelevant to design this, but having your main character have a French accent when he speaks English is not? Ezio had an Italian accent and there was never any mention about it being offensive. So I fail to see how it would be now. Whoever did the PR of this game must have been smoking some wonky stuff, because none of this makes any sense and ultimately destroyed any last chance this game had after its poor launch. Now, all these things on their own, the mediocre story, bugs and glitches, and horrible PR, are all not that big of a deal. But if you add them all together at the same time, because this happened all around launch, the general consensus around your game will be extremely negative, which it reflected in their sales. Usually, when these games release in November, as Assassin's Creed games do, the hardcore players will get the games around launch, and the more casual players get it around Christmas times or the months that follow launch. The negative PR was reflected in the sales of the games, and Assassin's Creed Unity is one of the worst selling games in the entire franchise. People must have thought, well, people are hating on it, so it must be a bad game. But it really isn't. Sure, it's by no means a generational title, but it's definitely worth playing. If you can pick it up for cheap during a sale, or you have the Ubisoft Game Pass, I highly recommend you give it another shot. Especially if you want to experience what the French Revolution was kind of like. The combat and free running feel smooth enough. Sure, the story might not be the best in the franchise, but it's still decent enough that it's not obtrusive. And the world is just absolutely gorgeous and incredibly immersive.